A good day to you, family. Hope you're having yourself an amazing day. Good rising, grand rising to the whole of the Black Hot Fire family. It is another beautiful Saturday afternoon, 13:04 East African time. It is the 2nd of November 2024. Yesterday they say was the new moon. Some people are celebrating Halloween. Others are celebrating their birthdays, including Sheila, who had a birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Sheila. And I'm here, of course, on the diary of a young black kid, and that is Omale with reason. Asking a very important question. Are you having fun, or are you doing this thing to survive spirituality? And spirituality as a whole, is life spiritual more than it is physical? Are you happy? Are you having fun, or are you doing this thing to survive? The pictures of every memory of your life. Fun, or are you doing this thing to survive? A very good question from Omale, all the way from West Africa. They make good music there. If nothing else, they make good music in West Africa. I mean, the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, they make good music. You have to give it to them. Today we're going to be talking about spirituality and how life is spiritual. It's something that I've come to learn, realize, and understand in the last couple of years. That life is more spiritual than it is physical. And that if you want to control the physical aspect, you have to be in control of the spiritual aspect. And that at the end of the day, it is the spiritual aspect that controls the physical realm. And that if your spiritual realm is messed up, your physical aspect is going to be messed up too. And the easiest way to fix your life is to fix your spiritual reality. We're going to be looking at all that because, of course, you cannot separate humanity and spirituality. Humans have always tried to find a reason, to find something to tie their belief in, because as somebody asked, if there's no God, then what's the point? That has always been the baseline of every spiritual religious argument. The understanding and the belief and the agreement that we need, whether or not they're there, we need to have something superior, something bigger than us. That has always been an understanding that many people have agreed on, scientists, believers, Christians, and everybody else, that if for nothing, if for moral compass, for the matters of sanity, they have that is why if you look at most of the civilizations that we had, I don't want to say every, but majority of the civilizations that we had, even when they couldn't find a god, they created one. It has always been important for them to create one, if for nothing else, for the sanity and the order of the people. So we're going to be looking at how life is spiritual, not from a religious perspective, but from a scientific perspective. And for that, we're going to be listening to a lecture by Professor James Small, who talked about African culture, spirituality, and history. But from that, we're going to look at, for a moment, going to look at astrology, of course, and how astrology is ancient African science. Is it true that at the time period when you're born can determine, for example, how you behave, how you act, and how you react to situations? Is it true that how the stars had aligned when you were born end up being a very important aspect of your life? So we're going to be looking at that and much more. We're going to be looking at everything spirituality and why your life is spiritual. As much as you may not see it, as much as you may disagree with it, life is very spiritual. Are you taking pictures of every memory of your life? That is Omale. And as we finish with Omale, let me start by reading a poem that I came across many years ago when I was in high school. I never understood it then, but I think I do now. I came across this poem many years ago when I was in high school. Let me look for it. I think it was by Diop, Birogo Diop, who's a West African. He's a West African poet. The name of the poem is breaths. And it says, listen more often to things rather than beings. Hear the fire's voice, hear the voice of the water, in the wind, the sobbing of the trees. It is our forefathers breathing. The dead are not gone forever. They are in the paling shadows, they are in the darkening shadows. The dead are not beneath the ground. They are in the rustling tree, in the murmuring wood, in the flowing water, in the still water, in the lonely place in the crowd. The dead are not dead. Listen more often to things rather than beings. Hear the fire's voice, hear the voice of the water. In the wind, hear the sobbing of the trees. In the breathing of it is the breathing of our forefathers who are not gone, not beneath the ground, not dead. The dead are not gone forever. They are in a woman's breast, a child's crying, a glowing ember. The dead are not beneath the earth. They are in the flickering fire, in the weeping plant, the groaning rock, the wooded place, the home. The dead are not dead. Listen more often to things rather than beings. Hear the fire's voice, hear the voice of the water. In the wind, hear the sobbing of trees. It is the breath of our forefathers. That is a poem that I came across many, many years ago when I was still in high school. It is by Birago Diop. Birago Diop is a Senegalese poet and storyteller. This particular piece was written many, many years ago. And the emphasis, if you look at the emphasis of the poem, but the Diop was one of the most prominent African francophone writers. He's written many African folk tales. He's written many African poems and stories that have been published in other European languages. So if you look at the theme and the main context of Birago Diop's poem, it's listen more often to things rather than beings. And say things, he refers to the fire's voices, the voice of the water, the sobbing of the trees. He likens that to our forefathers breathing, and he goes on to say severally in his poem that the dead are not gone forever. They are in the shadows, and they are not beneath the ground, but in the murmuring wood, and in the flowing water, and in the still water, and in the lonely places. This is a very, very old poem. Uh, and now that nuance has started, Africa had been in a period of sleep for many, many years, and recently nuance has started hitting in. And the main reason I talked about this story was this topic was because I saw Dr. Mumbi put up a tweet yesterday. And Dr. Mumbi's tweet reads, let me read Dr. Mumbi's tweet. Dr. Mumbi was worried. Dr. Mumbi is one of the Pan-Africans we have in Kenya. She was worried about how the deputy president was sworn in yesterday. So in her opinion, she thought the timing was not right because yesterday, she says, was the full moon and was the new moon. So she says, coincidence? Kindiki to be sworn in. Actually, let me just share the video instead of. Let me see if I can find the video in itself and share it. Because she says, let me read the tweet as I share the video. She says, Coincidence? Kindiki to be sworn in tomorrow on the new moon and the new month. The ritual day for the beginning of Scorpio season. And on the day of the dead, was this the plan all along? So she was worried about how the new Kenyan deputy president was sworn in on the new moon and the new month and the ritual day for the beginning of the Scorpio season. And I went through the comments and realized how much nuance and how much people. I was shocked at how much people understood what she was talking about, and most of them Kenyans. One comment read, "The spiritual realm is unsettled. Expect fireworks soon." The other one says, "It is not a coincidence. It is all meant to take the country into a demonic timeline. It's an attempt to enslave the sacred Kenyan soul." So the fact that astrology, which used to be okay, personally growing up, I thought astrology was just another myth. It was a belief. I didn't get the point. I didn't get how being born in a certain period could affect certain things. It looked more of a folklore, more of a fairy tale than any other thing. But now, as you get to understand African spirituality more and more, it almost looks like it's the understanding. With the understanding, I've come to realize that most of these things that we thought were folklore and fairy tales were actually had some truth to it, and the things that we thought were true, the ones that are fairy tales. So I came across this video that was talking about how astrology is African science and how the Greeks copied ancient African science to create astrology. Let's go through it.
Now, zodiac signs, right? Peace. Welcome to the breakdown. I'm your host, Clarity. Now, zodiac signs, they're everywhere, right? In movies, TV, online, and even walking down the street. Some people represent hard for theirs. Shout out to Libras. I got my scale. Whether it's for jewelry, tattoos, whatever else they could think of, really. Now, some of these people take it really personally, too, if you guess. On you? Yeah. What are these signs really based on? And what are the African origins of this idea? You know we're going to get into that and more right now on the breakdown. The breakdown. Tell me what you see.
It's a question almost everyone is asked at one point or another, and most of us know the answer. But what exactly are zodiac signs? Why do we have them? And what are the African origins of these ideas?
Astrology is nothing but a Greek word that means knowledge of the stars. Astrologos means knowledge of the stars. Ancient African people were the first people to observe the heavens and to chronicle their observations. What we find when we study the history of ancient Africans in the Nile Valley is that was the epicenter of culture, science, technology, and civilization.
At the heart of this epicenter was a peaceful, affluent, and deeply spiritual society that valued high-level scientific thinking. They studied everything in the environment, on planet Earth and beyond.
Prior to the advent of electricity, when the sun went down, people went to sleep. During the day, the sun was the primary principle which guided people's lives. So the sun became associated with God or the Creator. And then once people were no longer working, were no longer hunting, were no longer building shelter, they had time to sit back and just stare up at the sky, stare up at the stars. And they began to notice some particular patterns as they observed the heavens. They noticed that the stars followed the same movement as the sun, moving from east to west. They saw the moon, and they noticed that the moon's cycle was similar to the woman's cycle. And they began to see patterns in life, patterns in the heavens and patterns on earth. And so they were able to...
That is one of the things that we're going to come back and talk about later when we watch the professor's lecture, the fact that the moon cycle is similar to the woman's cycle.
To define time. They divided the day into 24 hours. They divided the year into 365 and a quarter days.
They also accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth. In the ancient world, Kemet was the primary source of both scientific knowledge and spiritual enlightenment.
Ancient Kemet was the place to be, and anyone who had the resources sought to come to Kemet from any corner of the world.
Modern astrology is mostly based on the writings of the 2nd century Greek scientist Claudius Ptolemy. His 4-volume work, the Tetrabiblos, represented everything the ancient Greeks knew about astrology, and ancient Greece was the foundation of advanced scientific and spiritual thought throughout Europe. But like his predecessors Socrates and Pythagoras, Ptolemy spent decades in Kemet studying at the feet of African scholars. Because thousands of years before the existence of Greece, Africans in the Nile Valley were the fathers and mothers of advanced scientific and spiritual ideas and practices. These African people birthed writing, mathematics, philosophy, art, medicine, architecture, and advanced sciences like biology, chemistry, and astronomy.
So the Greeks came, the Romans came, the Hebrews came, and many of these groups came without knowledge of science, philosophy, or religion, but based on their interactions with the indigenous African scientists and priests and priestesses, they then left the Nile Valley with a foundation upon which they could create their way through the world.
Most visitors to Kemet were humble, students grateful to be taught by the masters and return to their homelands to share what they had learned. But others, like the Greek general Alexander of Macedon, were not satisfied with merely receiving knowledge from Kemet. Instead, they wanted to control the entire African civilization. So after more than 3,000 years of relative peace and prosperity, Kemet was invaded and overtaken by Greece. They renamed it Egypt, and thousands of years of African knowledge was taken under European control.
The Greeks became the inheritors of the science, of the architecture, of the art, of the astronomy. So when we think of astrology, when we think of people's astrological signs, that is rooted in some real science. And with the Greeks' limited understanding of the African high science, they then tried to decipher it as best they could. So this high African astronomical science became, to the Greeks, astrology. All the Greeks did was copy what they saw in Africa.
So astrology in Kemet, what is now modern day Egypt, was not just about predicting fates and the way we see astrology now. It's all about predicting fates and behaviors. At that time, it was about deeper than that. It was about understanding cosmic cycles. It was the belief that each person is connected to the cosmos in a unique way. So that is what laid the ground for astrological systems such as the ones that were later developed in Greek, in Mesopotamia, and the ones that were developed in Mesopotamia were the ones that were adapted by the Greeks. So they always credited it. They always say that astrology came from Greek. They actually call it Western astrology, but in real sense, it had extensive contact with the Egyptian knowledge, and it was absorbed from the Egyptian beliefs that because the Egyptians, the people the Africans who lived there at that time, deeply studied the heavens and developed mystical interpretation of the celestial events. They used to study the stars. They would map out the constellations and everything, and they believed and they wrote so intensively that celestial bodies influenced earthly events and human lives. So the kinetic system of astrology is what I believe led to majority of the religion and spirituality that we have. The fact that they, at that time, even in Kemet, they would associate different stars and planets with gods and goddesses, and they believe that each had unique energies and influences. For example, there was Sirius. He was the dog star. And they would mark, he was marked every year at the annual flooding of the Nile. So most of the knowledge that was later came out to be known as the Western astrology was actually originated from Africa, from Kemet back then. That is where the Africans who lived there studied and intensively wrote books. And if you look at the Kemet calendar, and they are the ones that came up with the knowledge.
The Greeks also said that all the gods and goddesses of Greece had to return to Ethiopia once a year to renew their powers, lest they become mortal. So once you have this historical framework, you can then go back and look at the Greek gods and break them down to their African original prototypes. Astrology is to astronomy what religion is to spirituality. It is the source for which this powerful knowledge sprang, but it is interpreted differently by people who didn't have the depth of the knowledge as those who created the original source material.
Many of these African astrological concepts were incorporated into European.
So of course, people are going to argue and say that, of course, they're going to argue and say that astrology is a Western science. It is because it's called Western astrology. If you look at it in the books right now, they're going to call it Western astrology. They're going to argue that it's a Western science and it originated in Greek and so many other. But then I can give you at least 4 reasons why I believe astrology is an African science that originated from Africa. For example, Egyptians were the first ones. When I say Egyptians, I'm referring to Africans. If you look, Africans were the first one to create star maps and track celestial movements, such as Sirius. That was the one of the deities that he had. So they were the first one to create ancient star maps and do celestial observation before any other civilization or people did. So of course, if anything was developed from the stars, if any science was developed from the stars, it must have come from Egypt, because they were the first one to develop star maps and to do celestial observations. Secondly, if you look at there are so many zodiac-like symbols. Like I've frozen my screen, you can look at it. There are so many zodiac-like symbols in Egyptian temples, carvings of astrological symbols like those found in Greek. Most of them originated from Africa. If you look at most of the symbols that are found in the temple there's a temple in Hathor, Greek, that has so many of those symbols. If you look at them, most of them are also there in Africa. They are there in Kemet. So what that suggests is either a shared origin or influence. Either they share an origin, you're going to come to whether they share an origin or it was just a matter of influence, or it was stolen. That is what I mean by influence. So the other reason why I believe astrology is an African science is the fact that most of the Greek science was adopted from Mesopotamia astrology. So the Greeks adopted and expanded the Mesopotamia astrology. They were heavily influenced by the Egyptian knowledge. Then, as you saw, there was Ptolemy, who was an Egyptian astrologer, and he wrote several writings on astrology, which was later adopted to become what they now call Western astrology. The other reason why I strongly believe that astrology was an African science, which was stolen from Africans, is the fact that most deities from ancient Africa are linked to celestial beings. Egyptians associated specific gods and goddesses with celestial beings. An example is Ra. Ra is the sun god. Thoth is the moon god. So that shows there was a system where deities governed cosmic and earthly events. So they believed that cosmic events and earthly events were intertwined, and they believed that the cosmic realm always affected the earthly realm.
Religious practices. African spirituality and imagery was so highly revered in Greece that in many cases, even the original African names of deities were barely changed.
African personalities of Asar, Aset, and Heru were studied by the Greeks, and they became known as Osiris, they became known as Isis, they became known as Horus.
In some cases, even the African written language was taken and used directly by the Greek. For example, the zodiac symbol for Greek water-carrying god Aquarius is the exact same unchanged symbol for water as written in the ancient African language called Meta-Neter, or what the Greeks called hieroglyphics.
With their limited understanding, they tried as best they could to delve into the minds of these ancient Africans.
Popular motifs borrowed from ancient Kemet include images of Ma'at, a Neter or a deity who took the form of scales and governed fairness and balance. Another popular image was the Neter Asar, often depicted as a bull. Shu and Tefnut were divine twins. Serket was a healer who could cure the sting of a scorpion and was often depicted with one on her head. The circular zodiac at the Temple of Het Heru in Dendera, Egypt, contains the Greek versions of these ideas, along with their original Kemetic inspirations, several of whom are concepts the Greeks would have encountered only in Africa. Leo the lion, for example, is a species which is not native to Greece, but is native to Africa.
So on the outer part of that zodiac, in the ceiling of the Temple of Het Heru, there you have the zodiac symbols that we're most familiar with. Now, those are the Greek, but on the outer part, you have the Kemetic zodiac. And those are the ones that, unfortunately, many of us don't know.
And you'll see the circular zodiac, but there are 6 of the zodiacs throughout this temple, so that lets us know that it had a great connection with the early astrophysicists who were actually mapping out the stars. After all, the temple does go back to the Shemsu Heru. They laid out the whole Giza Plateau based off of their observation of the cosmos. We see the zodiac as well. See Scorpio. So see the Centaur, Sagittarius. These are the Greek signs. These are not the Kemetic signs. Because why is it Greek now? Because they usurped it.
So how does the person of African descent approach the Greek zodiac differently once they learn the Greek ideas came from African people in the first place?
We can now stand on the knowledge of our ancestors, which is what we're doing right now by reclaiming the knowledge of the Nile Valley and associating the Nile Valley with Africa. It is the oldest presence of science, history, culture, knowledge, and philosophy of any people on the planet. That is our African heritage. That is our legacy. We are connected to over 10,000 generations of African greatness. That knowledge resides in you.
There you have it. Astrology is an ancient African science that the Greeks stole and created what they call Western astrology. And the other reasons why that are maybe not given in the video as to why astrology is an ancient African science is, for example, there's the myth of Osiris and the constellations. The story of Osiris' death and resurrection was symbolically linked to the Orion constellation, indicating a belief in cosmic stories that impacted earthly events. So if they did the fact that the whole Osiris story is the Osiris story is a very ancient Egyptian story, and they linked it to the Orion constellation. Apart from that, the ancient Africans used the Decan system. That is, the Decan system is where they divided the sky into 36 decans, that is 10-day periods. Each period of each of the 36 decans was ruled by a specific star, marking times of fortune, health, and prediction. So the Decan system is actually the earliest framework of astrology. It is an early astrological framework. That is where they divided the sky into 36 decans, each a 10-day period decan, and each one was ruled by a star. Each was ruled by a specific star, and that marked fortune, it marked health, it marked predictions, and everything else. Apart from that, there is the concept of the cosmic order. It's called Ma'at, which is central to the ancient African spirituality. Ma'at represented cosmic order, balance, and harmony, reflecting a belief that individuals and collective life was influenced by cosmic forces. They looked at the cosmic order and balance and harmony, and of course they advocated and they tried to replicate the same in the physical life, and they believed that an individual and collective life was influenced by cosmic forces. Apart from that, ancient Africans used astrological calendars and used the same to predict events too. They used lunar calendars and star cycles to predict important events, including royal ceremonies and agricultural cycles, connecting the stars to the human and state affairs. That is how important, if you look at if you literally look at the ancient African science, most of it was based on the constellations and the stars. Apart from that, there was the symbolism of the Nile and celestial influence. That is where the Nile's flooding was timed by Sirius' appearance, establishing a link between cosmic events and life cycles. This belief in the cosmos influencing earthly outcomes is actually the foundation of astrology, of modern day astrology, which they call Western astrology, but in reality it's just African science. Apart from that, if you look at the ancient texts and temples dedicated to the stars, they had inscriptions, especially in Karnak, that were recorded star paths, which served as celestial maps, indicating a structured study of the heavens, similar to what modern day astrology claims to entail. So it's the fact that in the modern world, where majority of the astrology that we read is termed Western, they also make us believe that it's more fairy tale, and that being born at a certain period, even though in reality people are being born in a different period as somebody else, means there was a difference in energy levels in the universe. There are a lot of different things, and so it makes more sense to if you look at astrology from an African spiritual point of view, it does make sense.
And haven't been.
So here is another video that I wanted us to look at before. That is after looking at astrology. It is by Professor James Small, and he's talking about understanding African culture, spirituality, and for him, he focuses so much on the history because he says there's no spirituality without history. You have to know your own history first before you can be able to delve into any talk about spirituality. You have to know, where did your spirituality originate from? What did your forefathers used to do? What did the other generations of Africans that were there before you, what was it that made them so superior and so spiritual? And so, because for example, Professor James Small says that an African is a god. He says that they're the only species that originated directly from God. Anyway, let us listen to him.
And haven't been in Bermuda for 2 days now. And this is my third trip. I was trying to figure what's the message, and how am I going to deliver this message? And I'm still not sure. So I have a lot of slides, and I'm going to try to walk you through them in an hour and a half. Hope it doesn't go to 2, but it's going to get close to that. But what I'm going to talk to you about is you in time. I want to look at a lot of history, because if anybody heard the radio show yesterday, I kept going to the subject of history. And you need to kill these forward lights, whoever's the light person, so that they can see the screen. Don't worry about me. Yeah. History. The two, what do you call them, that points, the two that points at the screen. You have 4 lights shining on the screen, whatever they're called, strobes, spotlights. But history is the mystery right now, because we don't know our history, so we can't even decide who to elect to political office, and that's really sad. No disrespect, but if you don't elect the right people, you won't get the solutions to your problems. And yes, your brothers and sisters can make mistakes, and you can call them corrupt and think we need to get rid of them. But you can't put your enemy in the place of family who's just not doing right. Okay? So you need to understand history, because history will tell you who's your friend, who's your enemy. There's nothing but personal anger and that foolishness that people get confused with when you start talking about history and the harm done to Africa. This is not a personal dialogue. It's personal, but it's not personal. It's actually almost just race business. Race business. And everybody in this room, in 100 years, we're going to all be dead. So our business should be about those babies in the audience. Should be about the ones that's not here yet.
our business is to make a future of those to come. Now, I'm going to walk through the history with you, and then that's still too much light on the screen now. And then I'm going to talk to you about spirituality. But spirituality is a very short conversation. And it's not the spookism most people think it is. It's not the mystery thing you think it is. Spirituality is your comprehension of, your consciousness of, and your involvement in your reality. And if you separate your spirituality from your reality, you are lost. I don't care how much religion you got. You can pray till the cows come home. Ain't nothing gonna
You say that if you separate your spirituality from your reality, you are lost.
change. And don't we all?
And I think that is where we have gone wrong over the past, I don't know, ever since we got into the period of sleep. The fact that now, first, the spirituality that we adhere to and practice is not African spirituality. It is the spirituality that was enforced on us. And secondly, the fact that we now, the ones who do not believe in the spirituality that was brought to us, go to the extremes and become atheists, like the one that I hosted on my show the other day. They go to the extreme and they now believe that life is just physical and there is no spirituality aspect to it. So the fact that there is no that middle ground of I know what is right, I know the spirituality that was enforced on me is not the true spirituality, but I'm also not crazy to go all the way to the extreme and say that there is no, the spirituality realm does not exist and life is physical. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the true spirituality, look deep inside and see the true spirituality and the true history of me as an African. So now it has been, the lines have been drawn to only those two. You either have to be on this or on that. If you do not believe in the spirituality that, as we are telling you it is, you are an atheist. You are either one of the two. If you do not believe in this, then you do not believe in anything. But as the professor is saying, if you separate spirituality from reality, then you are lost.
I know that. We've been praying the cows.
And I thought I saw General Mosquito. A big shout out to General Mosquito in the comments who's saying, leave my Kikuyu head alone, General. Kindly.
Come home, the goats come home, the sheep come home, and still nothing is changing. No disrespect again to the tender heart. I'm not talking about disrespecting God. God is. I don't know God's name. I don't know what God looked like or nothing like that. But the one thing I do know, God is. And we got about 1,000 religions in the world. They can't all be right. And maybe none of them are really wrong. Because maybe religion is just how you try to approach knowing God. And many people have different approaches. So they may not necessarily any of them be wrong. That's right. And then you see me over there when I had the hair back in the day. That was a long time ago. So we're going to talk about spirituality, but at the end of the day, we'll talk about spirituality. History is a great and significant part of spirituality. Because if you don't know history and you don't know your story, how do you know what history gives you? History gives you your pedigree. And if you don't know your pedigree, how can you recreate yourself and your children? And it's a reason why people don't want the history of Bermuda taught in schools. I learned yesterday that the curricula is there. They're just not teaching it. The question has to be why. If it's nothing like they said, let us have nothing then. And let's see what the nothing will do for us. But knowing your history is the most significant thing in the world. I was talking to Sister Sherry yesterday, and I goes like, everybody's got a holiday. They have a whole list of holidays they put in the American Express calendar every year, and it's called International Holidays. Look at it and see how many we have. We don't have none. Not one. Everybody in the world have holidays. We are over 1 billion people, and we have none. We have the biggest continent in the world. You can fit China, Europe, North America, Japan, and a few other nations in the continent of Africa. 54 nations, oldest civilization on earth, gave the world all of its sciences that we know today. And we don't have one day where we unite in a common view of ourselves. I wonder how many holidays y'all have in Bermuda that is about Black people in a Black country. And don't fool yourself, this is a Black country, stop pretending. This is the Black country, and everybody else should be pleased that you share it with them, given the historical relationship we've had with them. I'm not gonna bite my tongue. They throw me out, I'll come back. You don't want me to come back, because I'm not the nicest, I'm not just a professor. So, history. I'm gonna see if this little machine that Io gave me worked. Oh, the cameraman, your light is cool. I mean, besides you, we don't get a video. I mean, are you cool? Turn on all the lights you need. I was only concerned with those two strobes, and they shouldn't interfere with you. Now, if you need more light, do more light, because a part of this is to get the tape that would be of value when we've gone away from here. So whatever makes that cameraman cool, that's what we're gonna do. Let's see. Now, how does this thing go? Where do I? Okay, it's the ion. That's the wrong way. That's the right way. But I don't want. Okay, there's a little something I gotta do. I'm not the biggest technologist in the world. You can understand that history is the most significant weapon you got. And if you don't infuse yourself and infuse your children, you're just creating a victims for those who want to exploit you, because you don't have a mind that locates you somewhere in human geography where you're secure. And that's what history does for you. Of course, that's me. And I always stop with this African. By African people, we mean the original humans on the planet Earth, the parent people. Africa is the first and only human creation to evolve from what we call God, the divine, or beings having a human experience. Africans, properly said, is God having a human experience. All other human groups are but mutations off of the African gene pool. And I hope that don't scare y'all, because I know y'all scared to be God. But let me break that down real quick for you. If nothing exists but God, right? Only God. If God exists, there's no room for nothing else to exist, is there? That's simple logic, right? God exists. So anything else that we perceive to exist have to be an aspect of that divine existence. Am I right? Don't be saying that because y'all want to make me happy because I'm a visitor. I want you to really get it, so you can understand why people are beating you down and fighting against you everywhere you go, no matter how good or how sweet you are. If that's the case, that nothing exists but God, and all other existence is an expression of an aspect of the divine essence, and you, the Black woman especially, is the first of God's creation, and everybody else on the planet emanates from your womb, then are you not God having a human experience called you? If you really get that, Jesus will make sense. And it won't just be an emotional trip on Sundays. Let Jesus make sense. Understand what it really is. Then you can understand the story and the metaphor and the allegory, how God will send itself to the earth as a human being, as you. Now, the Europeans confused it and thought we were talking about one person. It is every person. I know y'all got to pray tomorrow to make sure that boy doesn't say some evil stuff. No. But I put this one out so you can see all of the variety of us that come out of that continent. This is Ghana, my favorite home. I actually own a hotel there, a nice little 30-room villa in Cape Coast. That's my main thing. I spend most of my time. And this is the Ghana royal community, under each one of those umbrellas is a chief or a queen mother. And this is one of their cultural processions. And you see the king up here. And when you see the Ghana kings, they wear so much gold, they actually have a person whose job is just to hold their arms up, because the gold is too heavy. So there's someone holding this arm, someone holding this arm, and the gold is real. But it doesn't belong to them, it belongs to all of the people. When you become a king or a queen in Africa, you're not like Elizabeth, the robber baron, whose wealth all came from killing Africans and robbing Africans and Asians. Yeah. Is that y'all's royalty? There's nothing royal about that royalty, because they didn't get their money right. And so they don't deserve the titles they wear. These people deserve the titles they wear, because the people give them the titles. And they own nothing. The kings and queens in Africa own nothing. Okay? Everything they need, the people provide, but they own personally nothing. And so when you think about royalty in Africa, the royalty see themselves simply as a servant to the people, not as an oligarch over the people. And that's a different notion. This is Ethiopia. They're celebrating the Spring Festival. I just wanted to show you the variety of our beautiful people. This is Mali, in front of the Jenin Mosque, which is one of the oldest mosques in the world. And it was there long before Christopher Columbus. This is the Dogon people of Mali, that has one of the oldest astronomical sciences in the world outside.
Yeah, they actually claim that the Dogon tribe is one of the tribes, one of the people in the world that are most advanced in terms of astrology. That is, in studying and understanding and breaking down astrology and cosmology and the constellations and the stars and everything.
Ancient Egypt. And they were doing things with stars like Sirius A, Sirius B, that the Western world couldn't see until they got telescopes in the 1950s. And I just wanted to show we all look alike. There we are, looking like you and your children. And this is what they call the jungle, the rainforest. Do you know that North America have more jungle than Africa? Except they call it Everglades and swamps. All right. But this rainforest in Africa is some of the most beautiful places. But this is what most of Africa looks like. You know, again, the rainforest. But Africa, most of it is plains, like savannas. And we do have modern cities all over Africa. This is Ghana. I think this is Egypt. This is Lagos. This, I think, is, let me get it right, is not Tanzania. And this may be Congo. Tanzania. And this may be Congo. Yoruba history, this is one of my professors that laid this out, Yoruba history and culture. According to Professor Akinjobin, and you need to know what culture is, because culture is your other key thing. In actual fact, culture consists of all the items in the life of a group of human beings which make them to feel belonging to one another and distinct from any other group around them. The problem you have here, the problem we have in North America, we don't have a culture. We don't feel like we belong to one another. And we don't feel like we are distinct from all the other groups around us. We want to be everybody the same. Well, you define God, because God did not make everybody the same. And if you're just a scientist and say nature, then you define nature. Nature didn't make everybody the same. So how you gonna make everybody the same? That's unrealistic. It doesn't work. That's why we have the problem. You need to know your distinctions and organize around those distinctions so you can protect yourselves. And we're not doing it very well. And he went further to state that culture is not static, it is dynamic. Certain items that are no longer useful at a particular period, a particular time in culture can be discarded and thrown away, and usually discarded in favor of a new item, you know, that fits the circumstances. Like somebody asked me yesterday what my religion was, and I said voodoo. And they said, but some of you just said, You know, the word voodoo is an African word that means God. It comes from the Fon language and the Ewe language. The Fon language is the people of Benin. The Ewe language is the people of Togo and Volta region, Ghana. One of their words for God, the word for God in its totality is Sogbe Lisa, which says that God is the totality of creation. Every single African language have a word for God, and everyone mean God is every and all things at once, including you. But the word for God being in something is, in those two languages, where voodoo, the word voodoo comes from, voodoo gazi. You're saying the nature of God in me. Voodoo daha, the nature of God in nature, the ecology. White people didn't understand what our word was, so they used it to describe everything black. And then they began to assign their witchcraft behavior to our sacred science. If voodoo could do all the evil, mean things, you think anybody would have been able to enslave us? You think they would be able to hold us in slavery if we had such a weapon? Voodoo is simply our ancient sacred understanding of nature and cosmology, how we relate to it and how it relates to us. And those things, like in Haiti, where we just lost one of our great, great leaders, he was the Ata, the head of all voodoo shrines in Haiti. His name was Max Beauvoir. He was a biochemist, but yet he was the chief voodoo priest in Haiti. An accomplished man and dedicated to his people to try to teach our system, that system that we use to lead the only successful slave revolt in the history of the world, the Haitian Revolution. When we organized around voodoo, nobody could stop us. When we returned back to Christianity, Haiti has not been able to get up off her knees since. So you need to understand what voodoo is. Voodoo is how I know how to love you and how you know how to love me. And if I love you, I will let nothing hurt you. And if you love me, you will let nothing hurt me. That means we will protect one another. When I'm looking at you, I'm watching your back. When you're looking at me, you're watching my back. If we understood voodoo truly, it's one of the most beautiful systems of knowing God there is. And that's why they don't want you to ever know it. Now, I'm a priest, not in the voodoo tradition, even though I've trained in the voodoo tradition. I'm a priest in the Yoruba tradition. There I'm Oben Joko Adebayo. And in that tradition, I'm a priest of Oya. Now, you know, Oya is supposed to be the wind, but that's a metaphor, you know. And Oya is a beautiful lady with long locks. So every time I see a beautiful lady with long locks, I think I've met the goddess, you know. So Oya is also someone that could transform herself. But in the metaphor in the Yoruba, so Oya is one of those things that's called an Orisha. So in the metaphor of Oya, she is said to have married the king Shango. And I know many of you have heard the name Shango. She married Shango, but what does that mean? Shango means the courage that any human being experience within themselves to change for a higher spiritual self. That courage that tells you, I want to change and be a better person, that's what's called Shango. And when you have realized that within yourself, that I need to change myself, I need to grow ethically, morally higher and spiritually stronger, you can't go to the next step unless you marry, metaphorically and psychologically, Oya. Oya is change in process that happens in the human consciousness. And then Oya, that Orisha, must marry Ogun. And we say, oh, Ogun is the god of war, the god of iron. That's a metaphor. There's no god of war, god of iron. That's a reference to, if you took, to get iron, you got to take a piece of rock. And what do you do with the rock? You put it to fire. And what does the fire do? Burn out the impurities. So since you've consciously realized, I want to change to be a better self, a more spiritual self, you marry the notion of change within your own consciousness, which is called Oya. And now Oya must practice metaphorically what they call polyandry and marry another man called Ogun, which is transformation as the result of change. Now you all understand that? One of the Orisha Shango is I need to change myself. That Orisha marries Oya, I'm changing. And that Orisha marries Ogun, I'm transformed by the change. Do you understand that? So if you were to get into your own tradition, study it for yourself, you will realize somebody's been bamboozling you all along. And that there is a system of knowing you and knowing God that our ancestors had before we met these other people. Furthermore, we created Christianity, which I'll show you in a minute, and they took it away from us and turned it into something ugly and went around the world slaughtering whole peoples and taking their wealth and their land, then transforming it into an organization called the church and hand it back to you and say, now use it. And it hasn't been working because everywhere we sit as Black people in the world, somebody else is oppressing us. So maybe there's nothing wrong with Jesus. Maybe there's something wrong with how we are approaching the understanding and the knowledge of Christ. But I'm not a preacher, so I ain't even going there. I'm going to go back to my slide thing. Here we go. And then we're going to stop moving very quickly. When we get to the pictures of Egypt, I just want you to see the Africanness of it all. So we'll move pretty fast. I'm going to do a whole bunch of historical stuff with them. This brother wrote an extraordinary book which everybody should read. It's not just apropos for African Americans. It's true for Africans all over the world. He wrote it in 1933. It's called The Miseducation of the Negro. He said, if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. And let me tell you what I mean by that, Bermudas, before I go, because I'm messing with y'all a little bit today, because I'm glad y'all came. I am so happy some of y'all came out. You do not want to wake up when you're 80 or 90s and found out instead of being 60% of this island, you're only 20, and your children go and never come back because there's nothing worth coming back to. Would you? Y'all understand me? I'm trying to hit you in your belly a little bit here. Boy, I hope the politicians don't get mad at me and throw me off the island tomorrow. But y'all understand what I'm saying? Take it seriously. Because it has happened to other groups. It has happened to other people. You have one of the most beautiful nations in the world. You have one of the most beautiful ecology. You people that live here have a spiritual warmth I don't feel no place else on earth. Don't let nobody take it from you. Don't let it take it from your children, your grandchildren, your great children. Leave them this island intact as their legacy. Okay. So we'll move forward. That's the irritated genie over there. He likes to take pictures. That's my younger brother. Again, Dr. Woodson say, when we control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. He will find his proper place and will stay in it.
Wow.
You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will protest until one is made for his use.
So literally, Dr. Carter G. Woodson in The Miseducation of the Negro, which is a book that I've been reading for maybe the last 4 days. I came across this video on Tuesday, and so I looked for this book. When he talks about when you control a man's thinking, this book was written in 1930. I then remembered the letter that King Leopold wrote to the missionaries in Congo. It literally said the same thing that Dr. Carter G. Woodson is saying in The Miseducation of the Negro. He said that you teach the Negroes how to read, but not how to reason. And when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. And if you look at the Africa today that we have, let me talk about Africa. It is a society, a community where they have been able to, through years and years of targeted miseducation, control how we think. They have made Africans believe that Africa is supposed to be messed up and it's a miracle for you to even have food. through media propaganda, and even how Africa is portrayed even to the Africans in themselves. They have been made to believe that they are they are the lesser race, they are the weaker race, because every other people in the world are doing good. Every other people in the world have this world-class infrastructure, this accessible healthcare, these beautiful countries. But then you look back at Africa, you go to Ghana, you go to Uganda, you go to Congo, and the dominant theme that you're going to notice in all those countries is suffering. No jobs, corruption to the core, tribalism, wars, people dying. So helplessness and hopelessness is what runs in the continent, and that is why we see people trying to escape, run away every year, and thousands of them die in boats that capsize as they're trying to cross over to Europe. Others are shot dead. Others are beaten to death, such as the Melilla massacre that happened in the Moroccan border. It's literally just highlighting what Dr. Carter G. Woodson meant when he said, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. He will find his proper place and he will stay in it. You do not even need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there's no back door, he will protest until one is made for his use. His education demands it.
His education demands it. Now, Dr. Woodson said that in 1933, and it's still true today. And this is our master, Dr. Clark. John, they still love you, brother. He said, how can a people so potentially powerful have so little power? If we are the rightful owners of a piece of real estate called Africa, 12 million square miles, full of the richest minerals ever created, why then are we so poor? How dare we call ourselves an independent people when the only way to be independent is to manage all the wealth-producing resources the country you own possesses? How can we own so much and manage so little? Who's managing our wealth? And you need to ask that question right here in Bermuda. John went further and he said, history is a clock that people use to tell their time of day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are and what they are. So y'all better get serious about making sure your children is taught history in this curricula. I don't know what the education minister was talking about the other day, but don't make no sense to me. And I don't think it made much sense to you. So you need to get on it. Because this is our great master teacher, Dr. Ben. I always honor him and his books, you know, Africa, Mother, Western Civilization, Black Man of the Nile and His Family, African Origins of Major Western Religions. All of those are must read. You should put it in the library in your home. You know, he made his transition a few months ago. He was 96, but he's a most extraordinary spirit. And so Christians, and I know all of us in here, Christians, who like to say, well, why do we need to deal with this Black history thing? Well, the Bible says, only be careful and watch yourself closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes see or your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your hearts as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. They're talking about your historical experience on earth, your history. So the Bible supports me. It does not support the foolish people that says teaching our history is something foolish. So when we talk about genes, we talk about the DNA of God, the divine. Ancestors are your pedigree. You learn your pedigree from your history. God is your original ancestor. A people define themselves by referring to their origin. We are the best of our ancestors' genes. We are the latest version of our ancestors. We are the highest state version of our ancestors. Our children are the best of our genes. the latest version, and the highest tech model. Let me make that a little simpler. Everybody in this room is made up of the substance of their mother and their father, right? Via that egg and that sperm. And they were made up of the substance of your 4 grandparents. And they were made up of the substance of your 8 great parents and your 16 great great and your 32 great great great. And guess what? All of that culminates in you. Every bit of those DNA is lodged in you. Do you understand that? That means all of that experience, all of that memory, going back billions of years to God itself, is lodged in you. The very essence of God's consciousness is in every one of you.
Wow, I've never really thought about it like that, to be honest. The fact that God is the original ancestor, and that even scientifically we have genetic composition from our parents, and our parents had genetic composition from their parents, and so the genetic composition goes on broadening, and the variety, and it's a broader, it goes on broadening, and at the top, at the realm, at the very top is God now, who of course created through biogenesis, where nothing can there's a principle called biogenesis that says nothing can exist unless it was created. So the fact that I've never thought about it, that you contain the original genetics of God, because God is your original ancestor, that is mind-blowing.
But if you had African religion,
I think
every one of you,
I need to hear that just one more time.
All of that memory, going back billions of years to God itself, is lodged in you. The very essence of God's consciousness is in every one of you. But if you had African religion, it would teach you that. It wouldn't tell you God's up there and you down here. It would let you know even what the Bible says, God is in you. And I understand how we can all own one and not read the darn thing. We listen to a preacher doing his favorite lines, and because he's such a good performer and dancer and singer, we get bamboozled not to read the rest of the book. It's like one of my grandma was named Susan Small. Now, I come from South Carolina, one of those little rice plantations up in the boondocks in the woods. And Mama was a root woman. Y'all know what a root woman, y'all come Obeah woman, Juju woman. Mama was a root woman. She delivered over 400 babies in her life, because the root woman was also the midwife. But she was named Susan Small. But when she was about 90, she lived to be 101. But at 90, she told me, says, baby, that's not my real name. I said, what do you mean, Mama? That's not, we called you all your life. We call her Miss Pigeon, her nickname. But Susan was we thought the legal name. She said, no, I born Mary Magdalena Alston. But she said, I changed it when my sister died, and I chose her name because Mary Magdalena was a whore and a harlot. I go, whoa. So I started reading the Bible. I went from cover to cover twice because I didn't want my grandmother to be hurting. There's nothing in any Bible that calls Mary Magdalena a whore or a harlot. So why do the preachers teach that? Maybe Jesus had a wife, and they didn't want you to know. Since they decided they weren't going to have no more wives as priests, they were going to just be men without wives. So they took the one lady who's a part of the 12 disciples, the lady who anoints Jesus with oil, washes his feet. And I tell any brother in here, if you caught me anointing your wife with some oil and washing her feet, what would you do? Huh? That's a sign of very high affection. And yet they reduced the woman to a whore and a harlot. And there's nothing in the Bible that has any reference to her as a whore or a harlot. So you need to ask why the theologians is teaching one thing and claiming it's in the Bible, and then it's not. Because those things form how you see reality, like it did for my grandma, to the point that she changed her name. And then I was able to go back to her and show her, because she didn't read or write, that it's not in that Bible. Somebody made that up. So just a food for thought. I'm not saying he was married. I'm not saying when the wedding feast takes place in the Bible, the wedding had to wait because Jesus wasn't there. Because you can't have a wedding without a groom. And I'm not saying that's according to Hebrew tradition or any tradition. But Mary, Jesus' mother, his brother James, by the way, who was older than him, and his sister Sarah, were serving the wedding party. According to Hebrew tradition, the groom's family serves the wedding party. And when Jesus got there, in the metaphor, it says they ran out of wine, so Jesus turned the water to wine. But in the Hebrew tradition, only the groom could bring the wine to the wedding. So who was getting married? You need to ask the question, read the story again, and ask yourself, whose wedding is this? You know? Let me give you one more, and then I'm going to go on and leave that alone until you ask me questions, but I'm planting it in your mind. You remember when Jesus gets captured on Good Friday and they beating the poor brother up? Who did they let out of jail? Barabbas. What is the word bar in Hebrew? Son of. And the word Rabbas? Lord. The son of the Lord was let out of jail, people, when the Lord was put in jail, because Mary says, look, I don't care what you do. You get my boy out of jail. So you figure that out for yourself. So you're supposed to be such a bad prophet and everything. You go figure that out. And the Christ did. Had Judas turn him in. And he got his son free. If you read the books, Josephus' history of that time, he's the only one writing history of that time. And you can buy Josephus in most of the big bookstores. And even in the Bible, Barabbas was charged with trying to overthrow the government. Okay? And he was considered to be a zealot, a revolutionary of that day. Jesus was charged, according to the Bible, with sedition, with attempting to overthrow the government. Not with being God, not with saying he was the Son of God. He was charged with sedition. So it's important to read your document. And the Bible is an extraordinary document. But if you don't know it, you can hold it in your hand and still be in darkness. If you use it right, it'll walk you right into the light and free you. And you don't have to leave your church to do it. I'm not telling nobody to leave your church. No, I'm saying transform your church. So it's what it's supposed to be. But you can't do that if you don't study the history. Okay? And then I think the last little piece I'm going to give you. Then I'm going to move on. And I know some of y'all might be fuming, but don't fume. Just listen. Jesus is on the cross, right? Where's my brother? There's a Hebrew brother in here I met yesterday. What's the name, brother? The Levite. Today is Shabbat. So I can say Shabbat Shalom, peace on the Sabbath. Friday, Shabbat begins at sundown. In the Bible, Jesus don't get to the cross until about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, you can't kill nobody on the Sabbath. So he got to be off the cross and buried, because you can't do a funeral on the Sabbath. He got to be off the cross and buried before sundown. Now, in order to die from asphyxiation caused by crucifixion, it takes about 3 days. That's why they did it, because it was a suffering thing. So they take him down within 2 hours of putting him up there. So people say, well, Small, we got you there, because they stuck him in the side with the spear, because they know they had to take him down, and he couldn't die from asphyxiation. So they hit him in the side with that spear, and he bled to death. And I beg to differ, because Christ said, I thirst. Right? And then somebody gave him vinegar and gall. Well, gall in Hebrew is pure poppy juice. You know what poppy juice is? Oh, right. A lot of it grow over there. And vinegar was fermented apple juice. What happened to Christ when he drank that portion? His metabolism slowed down, and he couldn't possibly bleed to death because the heart was not pumping, because the brain wasn't calling for any doggone blood. And so he was taken to a grave real close by, because they know the sisters had to get in and do their little magic as healers, Mary and the other Marys. So Joseph, his friend, said, look, my tomb is right down the road. Let's get him there. And the sisters took care of business. And the next morning, they went and told the brothers, oh, the Lord is risen. He's gone. But remember, for you who think I'm being blasphemous, when he comes, according to the Bible, to Thomas and the others and meet them, and Thomas doubts this is his brother, what did he tell him? He didn't say, I'm a spirit, experience me. He says, stick your finger through the hole in my hand. I'm still human, just like you.
Wow.
Done with that now. So y'all got enough to digest with the Lord. So you can now study your book. And you will see somebody been playing you. There's a way to understand Christ in a way that the Christ spirit could transform you and help you transform your family and your environment. But if you just hanging around having faith and believing in an illusion that someone else has created with his words that has nothing to do with even the document, then you're in the same trouble we find ourselves in today.
This man just analyzed the death of Jesus in a way that I've never heard before. I'm actually mind blown.
That's our magnificent Nile Valley. Now, I need a timer. I need somebody to tell me when I got 15 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 5 minutes. Whoever got that responsibility. Because I have a lot of slides. This is one of the longest rivers in the world, and it is in Africa. This is the Great Nile River. We're one of our greatest civilizations.
Wait, what? He said Jesus never died and that he was taken to the grave as he was still alive, and so he never resurrected because he never died.
And one of the greatest civilizations on earth took place. That's the pyramid, one of them right there, and that's our beautiful Nile. This is Kilimanjaro. We never think of Africa as snow-capped mountains, but yet, do you know they have two skiing lodges up on this mountain? And Africans go skiing every single day. Did you know that? They don't say that on TV, do they? You can go camping down in the valley with no shirt on, and then an hour later be skiing up in the mountains where you need a lot of shirts on. But that mountain, the ice from that mountain melts and go to form what is called the Nile. This is Lake Nyanza, which they call Lake Victoria. This is another one of the major sources of the River Nile. This beautiful mountain, the first one is in Kenya, Tanzania. This one is in Uganda. This is Mount Rwenzori. Both of them mean mountains of the moon. And one of the papyrus in ancient Egypt, the Egyptian says, we come from the foothills of the mountains of the moon where the god Hapi dwell. So the Egyptians said that they came from south in the area of these two mountains, and they migrated north up the river and built that civilization. So this beautiful snow-capped mountain, this is in Africa. This is in Uganda, and people go skiing here too. And there's an extraordinary lake with all kinds of resorts and boating and stuff that go on. So Africa, they're still telling us Africa's jungles with monkeys and cats and things. Matter of fact, when I was little, they used to show all these tigers in Africa. You know there's no tigers in Africa? You can only find tigers in Asia. But the white man went clear on his logistics, so he had tigers running around Africa back in the day. So we need to know better. This is the Isfet Falls in Ethiopia. This forms what is called the Blue Nile. The first one we were looking at was the White Nile, the water that created the White Nile. They come together in Khartoum, Sudan, and form the Greater Nile. That is one of the most beautiful falls in the world. And you can walk almost where you can just sit about 100 yards away and just watch it and listen to the music it makes. I wanted to go to that. I think this one I wanted to show all of those spots represents African kingdoms and civilizations before slavery. We had all of these extraordinary civilizations that the West know about. While they're teaching us that we're barbarians, they know about every one of these civilizations. You know why? Because all of the damn artifacts are in their museums in Europe. Matter of fact, if you took your artifacts out of the museums in Europe, they would probably only need 2 museums for all of Europe. Because nearly everything in the museums, from Sweden to England, from Belgium to France, is yours. But they took your artifacts, they took your history, and it told you you didn't have one. But there's some information that's left to tell us a different story. And this is from a book by Sheikh Diab called Civilization of Barbarism. And this is the photograph he took. This painting is from the tomb of Ramses III, 1200 BCE. It shows the Egyptians perceiving themselves as black and representing themselves as such without possible confusion with the Indo-European, who's the second guy, the Asiatic type, and the Semite, which is the European type. And this is a representation of the races in minute detail, which guarantees the realism of the colors. Throughout their entire history, the Egyptians never dreamed of representing themselves by types B or D. In short, the Egyptians saw themselves as black, and they saw the rest of Africa as black, and they were the same people. And this is on the tomb. They left this there thousands of years so we would have no doggone confusion about who they were. And the Europeans have got this painting too, and have had it for centuries. So why they playing the Egypt is the white game? But we'll see why they play that game, because that's an important game for them. The pyramid text is written by Unas, 5th century dynasty, the oldest religious text known to man, 4,000 years before the Torah, the Bible, or the Quran. And guess what? Your Genesis story comes from this African Genesis story that was 4,000 years earlier than your Bible. In our story, and I'll paraphrase it, I have it here, but I don't want to read it. God says, I created myself out of myself. I brought existence. Now, I created myself out of myself. I caused existence to exist so that existing might exist. And then God goes further. And God said, I hiccup, I vibrate, or what we call the word, and I began to create. And the first thing he created, he says, he spat out Tefnut, which is air and moisture. And then he coughed up Shu, which is the gases. And he says, out of the gases and the air and moisture that I created, those elements, came Geb, the earth. And out of the earth came Nut, the skies, the planets, the stars. And then Geb and Nut came together, and those elements produced humans, the first human being Asar, and his wife being a Set. And they give birth to the Son of God, Heru. Then our God goes back and says something most extraordinary. First he said, I created all that, and it's a long story, I'm just coming shortly. He said, I created all that my heart desired, and then I expanded in it. And then he says in his final statement, now this is Amen. Amen means, we got the word amen from this name. It means the hidden one, the unknowable. It says you cannot know God. Okay. And then it says, I came into being out of my mother, Nun. Now this is the almighty, big potentate. And he's saying, I came into being out of my mother, Nun. So in the African tradition, the omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipotent causation is feminine, not masculine. So that book, chiseled in stone, is called the Pyramid Text. And so the gods of chaos. Now, we say gods, but they didn't use God in the language. They used the word Neteru. And Neteru means the essence of the divine, or the essence of God, or the particles of God, or the parts of God. And they refer to God as the Necha. We get the word nature from that word, by the way. Just like from the Son of God, Heru, we get the word hero, because he is the hero in the metaphor, the story. He saves the world from the evil ones. So this is the primordial water, a woman representing the ripples. And she's carrying the boat with life. And you see that beetle in the middle? That represents rebirth, resurrection, regeneration. And that ball of light, that's God. That's energy. Now this is one of the symbols of God. You can see we use from the very beginning black symbols for God. This is ancient Egypt. This is God Ptah. And he has a little afro. And so you can see he's a black man. And this is God Almond. Now, these are the original paints. So we were hell of chemists. To have the paint last all these thousands and tens of thousands of years. We painted God black. We had gold paint. We painted his hat gold. We had white paint. We painted his garments and his feathers white. We even had red paint. Some people said the Egyptian was red. Well, they didn't paint themselves red. They painted themselves black. And you can go and see this anywhere in Egypt today. And that is supposed to be God Almighty, the omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipotent. And this is an aspect of God, that God is boundless. That's called He. And this is the feminine aspect of that same time, the darkness, where things are created. Like when you plant a seed in the ground, it's in darkness, and all the things that create the light that you then get to utilize happens in darkness, and then it emanates into light to be nurtured. The gods of order, the Necha Tepnut, this is Tepnut, and the Necha, the sky god, that woman straddle body, that's called Nut, the goddess Nut. And the person with the hands on the breast and in the vaginal area, that's air, that's Shu. The person laying on the ground, that's earth, that's Geb. And the two horn-headed person, that's Kanun, that's the creating element. And so this is the way they taught, because if you have a population that's illiterate, because they're farmers, they're fishermen, they're sheep herders, you can't write the cursive writing we use today. You have to create a writing that depicts nature to explain your current reality. And that's where this language comes from. It was written by the elite class for the masses to learn the same body knowledge that they knew. Like today, our elite make sure we don't learn what they know. But in those days, they wanted to make sure the people understood what they understood. And that's why the civilization lasted for over 10,000 years. There's no civilization on earth that no one can reference that lasted 10,000 years before we fell. And this is another aspect of God. This is the aspect that is called the Christ aspect, or the Caress aspect. This is called Asar. He's considered in this culture the first risen savior. And the holy city where he arose is called Abydos. And people still go there and make pilgrimage to that city till today. On the 11th of September, the Ethiopians celebrate their New Year. Their New Year is a celebration of the resurrection of Asar and the reconstitution and regeneration of him by the spirit of his wife, Aset. And this is the first Madonna and child, who we refer to as the goddess Aset. The first time in history anyone will see a mother and a child, and the child is Heru, according to the metaphor in our books, is born of immaculate conception with a relationship with God and not her husband Asar. This is Nephthys, the wife of Set. I won't even know. The Set is the guy who we would call in our Bible Cain. He's the one that will murder. He's the hunter, and he will murder his brother Asar, who's the farmer. Like Abel was the farmer and Cain was the hunter. There's where the story came from.
Wow.
There's nothing wrong with somebody using your story. There's something wrong with them telling you you never had one. Okay? And of course, this is the brother. Again, this is Set. This is how he's symbolized. But Set was not considered to be the devil. Africans don't have a concept of the devil as such. Set is considered to be chaos, something that occurs in your consciousness, in your community, in your family, in your nation, when you don't have order, when you don't have justice, when you don't have a plan to balance and harmonize. Then you will end up in a Set situation, which is a chaotic situation, which could lead to destruction and death. Oh, I am so sorry. I forgot to turn this thing off. And nobody should be calling me anyway. Oh, that's my older brother. But he can wait. He knows I turned him off. He said he loved me. At least he knows I'm here. So this one I thought you'd like. You want to read it for yourself? Everybody read that aloud. What does it say? Yeah. So you thought that 12 disciple thing was new? Nah. The African God had 12 disciples too. So he has his 12 disciples. The first 12 disciples. I'm not going to do details on them, but you can go and study all of this stuff. It's too much. If I was to give you a lecture on all of this, we'd be here 5 hours. So I'm just going to show you. And then you need to go and say, I don't know what a small telling me the truth. Let me see if some of this stuff is really real. Let me look it up for myself. The Neteru, this is Horu. This is the one that the Christian would call Christ. His whole story is the same as the story of Christ. The story of Christ is the story of this guy. That is his symbol over there. And isn't it interesting? That's the symbol the American took to be the shield of the United States of America. Did they tell you that they took your symbol of resurrection to be the shield of the United States of America? Since America saw itself as the resurrection of the New Jerusalem or the New Egypt or the New Mecca, they used the African symbol for resurrection and never mentions it to you. Except they put arrows in one of the paw and olive leaf in the other paw. This is the symbol of God Canoe. Remember, I show you the horn person. He's creating man on the potter's wheel. He's not separate. Each of these symbols represent an aspect of God's personality.
I don't know if the cameraman deliberately refused to let us see the symbol of Jesus. That's the symbol of resurrection. Because I don't understand why the camera was fixed on the people for far too long. I wanted to see that symbol myself. But anyway.
According to the African. So this is the creative aspect of God's personality. And it's symbolized by canoe. This is your first angel. This is Ma'at, the nature for truth, justice, harmony, balance, righteousness, and reciprocity. There's nowhere in the history of the world where there's a winged female being before this one, Ma'at. So they take the concept of the angel from this concept that represents truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, and reciprocity. Her symbol is the scale. Let me go back. I may not have put the scales here. So in America, they take her symbol, the scales, and they use it in the justice system, and they take her and blindfold her and call her Lady Justice. But they don't tell you they took your symbol to do that. It's deep. You got to understand. See, if you know your history, you see all the fraudulent stuff other people do. This is the book of Gates. We're not going to go into that. This is another one of our holy books that is thousands of years older than the Bible. This is another one referring to the God Happy, but referring to life, how it generates out of the now. You can see we were black from the beginning of time. We got the 10th commandment, of course, and we all know the 10th commandment because we had to learn it in church. And we learned that the 10th commandment was given to us by Moses. And we learned that Moses was found as a baby in the river in Egypt and raised by the family of the pharaohs, the ruling elite of the country, because the pharaoh's daughter or somebody or sister found him there. And so he lives to be 80-something before he becomes a prophet. So that being the case, then, he had to have mastered the 42 commandments, out of which he took the 10. If he lived in there with the rich people, he had to learn this. So why did he have to go to a mountaintop to get 10? Because metaphors should never be confused for history. The mountaintop is your mind. The mountaintop is your consciousness. He took this complex 42 and transformed it into a simplistic 10 that makes sense and was usable for an ignorant people that he was leading out of a difficult situation. And he wasn't leading them out from under you, the Egyptian. At the time period in history talking about, that northern portion of Egypt had been taken over by an Asiatic group called the Hittites. I'm sorry, the Hyksos. And they stayed on us for 400 years. At the end of that 400 years, we came back from the south, from Sudan and Ethiopia, and took the country back. But those who had lived under their jurisdiction for 400 years and had become mulattoized and acculturalized under them, who was also fighting a civil war against them, they flee us too because they were no longer like us. It's like many of us in the United States of America, we don't think we African anymore because we light-skinned and we mixed and we got all these other things going on. I know y'all don't have that problem down here. you know. And so that group we know in history as the Hebrew Israelites, but they were still black people, and I'll show you pictures of them as we go along. Oh yeah, we invented circumcision, not them. Matter of fact, if you read the Bible, Abraham, when he comes from Ur of the Chaldee, and he comes into Canaan, it is the king of Canaan that told him he was filthy and unclean. And it was the king of Canaan that circumcised Abraham, not Abraham that circumcised him. That's in your Bible. If you read it, you won't be confused. But even Canaan was under the jurisdiction of Egypt. And so here in ancient Egypt, thousands and thousands of years before any of them, we are circumcised. And look how modern it is. By tying that thing around the penis, he cuts off the flow of blood. So when they do the cutting, the person will not hemorrhage. Isn't that something? Back in the day, there's very little that's new under the sun. You'll find out. This is my favorite. This is called the Papyrus of Ani. Now, papyrus is simply one of our documents. Let me show you some beautiful things in this. This is Mr. Ani. He died. This is his soul, his heart, his deeds on earth is being weighed against the feather of truth, Ma'at, the lady with the wings I showed you. There she is at the top of the scale, which is her symbol. If his heart is heavier than this feather of truth, he will go to be eaten by this crocodile, hippopotamus, lion, whatever this thing is. But here's the jackal, the dog, who's weighing, who's carrying out the judgment, making sure the scale is balanced. Now, the reason they got the jackal handling the judgment, because the jackal was a dog who would take his food when he killed meat, which was hard and raw and hard for his body to digest. He would bury it in the desert, and the desert heat would cook it. And when it got just to a point where it was digestible, that dog would dig it up and eat it. And so they looked at the dog as symbolizing good judgment. So that's why he's used in this handling the judgment. And so if he's judged to have had a good life, then all of that is written down by this person. Now, if we want to use this as the American legal system, this is the man being tried. This is the district attorney trying to prove it. This is the concept of justice in place. This is his lawyer. This is the court bailiff. And so he's proven, this is the court recorder. He's proven to be innocent. And so the bailiff takes him before the judge, who's God. It's all been based on the laws of Ma'at. And the true judgment is the 12 jurors, the priests, and God. And doesn't that look like the American legal system? But they tell you some shit about the Magna Carta, and they won't tell you about this. But let's do another flip through it. Here is the brother who died. His soul is being weighed. This is Satan. This is St. Peter. These are the commandments. He gets passed. He goes to Herod, the Son of God, born of Immaculate Conception, because he wants to enter heaven before God, but he can't enter heaven except by the Son. And his judgment will be by the 12 disciples. And as Jesus sits on the throne as God, there's Mary and the other Mary as his support. Now let me tell you something. And for brothers who don't know, and I'm not afraid of it, I'm a Prince Hall Mason, 32nd degree, Cornerstone, 37, Grand Lodge, New York State. Every king in Egypt sat on the square. There's so much people have taken from us and not even mentioned it to us. But if you know your history, you can feel comfortable. You don't have to hate nobody. Everybody says, oh, if you teach, they're going to hate. Who got time to hate anybody? You hate other people, you hurt yourself. But if you know your history, you can make the appropriate decisions for yourself. That's why you need to know history. So we go on. The Temple of Asar. What I'm doing with this series that I'm going to show you really quick is that these are pillared temples. And when we built these magnificent temples, there is no Greece, there is no Rome, there's no Dorian columns, there's no Ionian columns or any of that foolishness we see in masonry. because we are the ones that created the Pillar Temple. These are our columns. And so people need to learn enough history to know that everybody has robbed us blind, and we need to take our stuff back. We go to one of the first symbols of a leader known in history, and his name is, in line 1, this is the hieroglyph, these writings here, these are the hieroglyphs. So in the first line, it says, he's in the Hetu, he's in the temple. The second line, he's saying that he's Seth of the god Seth. He's studied the god Seth. And the next line, Net Anu, talking about the city and the people he's from. Part of the people, if you go to Japan, there's a whole black people in Japan, which most of you don't know about, called the Anu people. They live in the northernmost island called Hokkaido. They're the ones who was the original inhabitants of that island until the white Asiatics came down and took the island from them. But they said the Genesis is back here in Egypt. And Egypt, in this early line, you see that they're talking about the Ainu and the Terra Neta. That's one of the god, he's devoted to this aspect of God, Terra. And so this is the first symbol anybody know of a royal ruler anywhere in history, Mesopotamia, China, wherever. And everybody knows this. This is in the museums in Europe. And there really was a scorpion king. This is 4000 BC. And there's this symbol, the scorpion. And he's king of Egypt. But when they do the story of Scorpion King, they did use a brother to do it, even though they found the lightest brother they could find. But they did use a brother to play the Scorpion King. But there really was a Scorpion King. But I'm sure the story wasn't the storyline that they ran. But it's people playing with your history. Again, I'm showing the beauty of the temple. This side is what it looks like now. This is what it looked like when you reproduced the painting that was on it centuries ago. And I'm putting up because these pillar temples is ours. This is our first, well, not the first, of course, but one of our earliest forms of writing. And this is from the Sudan. And then this is the hieroglyph that evolves from that writing. Now, hieroglyphs is using elements out of the ecology to represent concepts, ideas, and principles that people could easily understand if they're not literate. Okay. And this is our cursive form of the same hieroglyph. You understand? Now, this is what the elite did. This is what those who went to college did. Yes, we invented college. And guess what? We invented the 7 liberal arts. And if you read in your Bible in Proverbs, I forgot the chapter, but Proverbs talk about the 7 daughters of wisdom. The 7 daughters of wisdom, people, is the 7 liberal arts. Okay? So guess what? I got to read you stuff because people play with you. In the temples of Kemet, of Egypt, each segment, and I'll show you one of the temples and I'll explain it. But this is our written language. Now, does it look like you see where Arabic came from? And does it look like you can see where Hebrew came from? This is another form of the same language. This form is used mostly for like bookkeeping, accounting, and so forth. The other is used for correspondence. And this is one of the first kings to unite Egypt, Narmer, that we knew of, because Egypt is separated into what they call the north and the south. And so he was the guy that pulled all of it together, along with, I'm sure, other people, but he's given the credit. And how you know that he's an African man, because in this scene, this is one called the Narmer palette. In this scene, he's going back to his village, and on this pole is his placenta. One of the traditions in Africa is the king placenta is kept. And whenever the king goes back to the village of his mother where he's born, he had to take that placenta with him. You understand? Because the placenta is mummified. Let me tell you how you do a mummy. You take bodies and you submerge it in salt. The salt sucks out all of the water. Bacteria can't live without the moisture. And once you suck out all the water, then you use herbs and oils to preserve the body for perpetuity. And they still do it in Africa, by the way. That's how all the kings in Ghana get buried, the kings in Nigeria get buried. They all get mummified today. This is another close-up of his placenta being carried in a procession as he's going back to visit his home village. That lets you know that is an African man, because that is an African cultural thing. We don't know no other culture in the world that does that thing. Well, this is the first dynasty king. You see, and all of the ones you're going to see, I'm going to rush through because I just want you to see that these are black people. We're going to go from the first dynasty to the 30th dynasty. And you see, he's a young African man. And this is another king. This is the second dynasty. You see, he has his red locks. That was the hairstyle of all the pharaohs. This is another king, and he's in the third dynasty. You can see, they always break up our nose, but that don't hide who we are. Okay? Even breaking off his nose didn't make no difference right here, because he's straight up brother. This is the king, Pharaoh Zoser. He built the step pyramid. This is the third dynasty. Now, is he an African man or not? This is the Pharaoh of Egypt, as they saw themselves. This is the building that he had built that's still standing today. There's no mortar between the blocks. They just set them in place. This is the man that built the first step pyramid. For those who are nurses and physicians, those who have to take the Hippocratic Oath, you took the oath for this man. This is the man the Greeks called the god Asclepius.
Anyway, I'm told we have to end the show because the chat and messenger is coming up in a bit. And of course, my time is almost up. But I have never learned as much as I've learned today on African culture and spirituality, especially the interconnection between. The other day I learned about how Christianity was invented, of course, with the origin of even the word Christ from crystals and everything. And that was Professor James Small, who was teaching us a little bit about African culture, spirituality, and history too. I'm sure we're going to continue with this show next week, if I'll be around. If I won't be around next Saturday, then we'll continue with it the other Saturday. Anyway, this is the Black Hot Fire Network, the media of the 21st century, and we're looking at how and why life is spiritual. We live in a spiritual world. We started by looking at, of course, astrology, and how astrology is an African science that was stolen from Africans and assimilated by the Greeks, and they now call it Western astrology. And of course, after that, we came and started looking at how, unless we understand our history, then we cannot talk about spirituality if you do not even know where you are, where you come from, and the fact that we learn and we are a genetic composition of our ancestors, of our forefathers, and God is the original ancestor. I think that is the best thing that I've learned today, that I have the genetic composition of God in me because he is the original ancestor. My parents, my grandparents, the lineage goes back to him because he created the universe. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you on Monday on the Black Hot Fire updates. This has been the Diary of a Young Black King. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Much love.